Two cities in Puerto Rico are also ports, giving the idea of more of rich port, Puerto Rico. But you have on the northern area a port covering the Atlantic Ocean, and on the south you have another port covering the Caribbean Sea. That is Ponce, okay? And the reason I'm bringing up Ponce here is because this street marks the first ever road. If you notice, the first road takes you from Old San Juan to Ponce, and it's because they wanted that the first two cities connect from a port on the north and the other port on the south, okay? So see. Pero nada, if you take this road in Puerto Rico, and that's the first ever road in Puerto Rico, and if you follow it all the way up to the end, you have arguably one of the most important buildings here, which is the House of the Governor. The House of the Governor is the oldest one still in use in all over America. Right next to it, you also have the antique cathedral, so we're talking about it having religion, politics involved, and also a lot of social pressure. I've seen this street filled all the way up to the highway. Okay, in 2019 there was an estimate of around 1.7 million Puerto Ricans here. In Puerto Rico there's only 3 million people, so that is a lot of people in that tiny street. Okay, so sí. Pero nada, we're gonna be going inside here, and I want you guys to start noticing the colors of the buildings. That's the first thing we're gonna talk about. Okay, I'm gonna go inside. Okay. You had the one with the dark tone of blue, okay? And we're gonna talk about the two of them. And first of all, I'm gonna talk about these ones here, because a lot of people ask which is the first ever Puerto Rican flag, and it's actually the one in the middle, which is very similar to the Dominican flag. If you've ever asked the question if Puerto Rico was independent at one point, it was independent for one day. In El Grito de Lares, that was the day that Puerto Rico overtook the Spanish and threw them out for one day. Then the Spanish were able to reclaim it in a city called Lares. And the thing is, the flag that they used was this here. That was a big flag, and it's also the flag, the official flag of the city that it's from. So if you go to Lares, you're going to see that flag there. That's a city in Puerto Rico. But it's the only place that there's been a full-on successful independence movement, although it lasted now. But right next to it, on the right, you have the first ever official flag of what you guys know of. And that one, if you notice, the Puerto Rican flag and the Cuban flag were literally the same flag. And it's because they were made together in the moment that Puerto Rico for the independence from the Spanish. So we had a revolution happening in 1868, and then another one happened again in 1895. Okay? And that one was an alliance with the Cubans and also with the Dominicans. There was a moment that Puerto Rico, Cuba, and the Dominican Republic believed in the Confederación de la Ambrilla. Basically all these Caribbean countries being one. That's very far from what's currently believed, and it's nothing that's believed by anybody in Puerto Rico currently. Pero it's something that happened. They did this flag exactly like the Cuban flag, but the colors are inversed, right? And if you notice, the star on this flag is tilted. When you look at the star and on the one from 1952 and the one that's on the governmental buildings, you'll notice that it's as the same ones or similar to the straight angle of the U.S. flag, right? And that brings me to the difference between the official flag of Puerto Rico currently and the one that you have here. This one's always very representative of the independence movements, and this one from 1895 towards 1952, it was an illegal flag. Same thing with the Spanish language, it wasn't used all the way up to when they did the Commonwealth. And when they did the Commonwealth in a way to like pledge allegiance towards the U.S., they basically changed the color of blue to a color more similar to the U.S. Now, what happens in our politics currently, the flags very much represent that. If you see somebody with either flag, it's very much, for example, I have a grandfather that if you give him one flag, he's going to be like, oh, that's not my flag. And I'm not going to say which flag it is for that. Pero, by the way, if you guys see anybody with either flag, please do not tell them anything. It's just information for your use, okay? So now you understand that entire thing, okay? Apart from that, we're now going to be going inside here on the right. How the bricks get blue? Okay, great question. Mira, is there anybody here from Liverpool? Okay, we've never had. There. You've been there. We've never had anybody from Liverpool. I've been asking for the past 4 years. Right? Exacto. Is there anybody from Baltimore? Okay, mira, okay. I, for some reason, read about the architecture in Baltimore. I've never been to Baltimore myself, but I'm history buff and I've read about it, okay? In Baltimore, it's a great example to compare it. There's an area where they use on the houses, on certain areas they used on the floors, or on the the streets, but now they use marble, I believe, in certain areas. The reason that happened is because in Baltimore, they started using it for the weights on the ships. They call that ballast, is it?
Ballast.
And the thing is, they started throwing it away in Baltimore, and then they started recycling it and using for the floors. For me, it was very crazy to read that in Baltimore because, well, marble is extremely expensive now, and seeing it as a thing that was thrown away, ¿me entiendes? It's very interesting, ¿verdad? But these had the similar thing. These were things that were brought from Liverpool, and they were used as the weights on the ships. They threw them away on the ports, and then they started recycling them, right? The thing is, here, they placed an iron plate on top of what they used the material for as a normal brick, and they put an iron plate on top. That iron plate carries a metal slag, which gives it the blue residue color that it has.
Oh, okay.
If you notice, on the sides and in the inside, it doesn't have the blue. And it's because it doesn't have the iron plate.
Almost looks like an enamel.
Exacto. When I was younger, I've seen Old San Juan change a lot. In just 21 years, it's changed drastically. And over there, that entire street used to have the bricks, and this one as well. But the thing is, they've slowly been taking them away and donating to different museums around the island. And it's because they started developing these huge craters. Let's put it like this: Old San Juan was not built for cars.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So the iron just got corroded and removed, or what happened to the iron plate?
No. Like you're saying, when they changed those streets, no, a lot of them they took them away and they sent it to different. So you know what? And I believe, for example, there was a big thing on that street there when they moved them in 2016. I believe a lot of the bricks they actually brought them back to a museum in Liverpool. Which is crazy because also in Liverpool, I believe there were other bricks that were used in the same material, and I believe they're also in the French Quarter of New Orleans. If there's anybody from New Orleans, is there anybody here from?
Been there.
I haven't hit one.
Yeah.
I've only hit with you. Baltimore. That's the closest thing that I've gotten to, right? Better now, man. So now we know how the bricks got here. Apart from that, this is a thing that's currently happening as we're here. But typically, we're going to talk a lot when we're traveling north to south or vertically rather than horizontally. In Old San Juan, quick recommendation, try to always, if you want to break from the sun, get inside the tight alleyways. They're going to offer, apart from great shadows, a lot more ventilation. And it's because on the north you have the Atlantic Ocean, on the south you have the bay. Okay? So when you compare where we're at currently and then compare it over there, when it gets really hot here, the streets that are horizontally are typically saunas. And when you get inside the alleyways, they offer a lot of ventilation. Okay, there's going to be other areas that we're going to see it more evidently rather than here. But yeah, okay. Apart from that, last thing we're going to talk about here, this place here, El Asador. We're going to place multiple places for food, so you're going to be covered. In terms of this place, El Asador is one of the best seafood places in Old San Juan. Old San Juan is known for seafood, and it's no surprise, but that's around all of the local fisheries around the bay. If anybody likes fishing, there's areas here that you can see when they bring the fish in. I believe there's a certain area, I don't remember which hour to give you, but there's a port here that does it. If anybody wants the place, ask me and I'll send you a link, okay? At the end of the tour. Pero nada, mira, El Asador, they do el mahi-mahi, el dorado, they also do, I don't know if they're doing it anymore because I've seen a lot of places take it out, pero swordfish. Which is rarer in the metropolitan area rather than in other areas in the western side of the island. But here they used to have. Okay? I don't know if now because I haven't gone there in a while. It's a little bit expensive. But you guys can check it out. Okay? Now we're gonna be going through here, and if this is La Calle Fortaleza, now we're going to San Francisco Street. By the way, guys, if you guys want to find your way back after we finish in El Morro, get into one of these two streets, and they're gonna take you all the way up to Plaza Colón. Okay? So see, I'm gonna keep going over here. Okay, so guys, now we're currently in the Franciscan church here. The Franciscan church is, they arrived here in 1625, the Franciscans. In terms of the religious groups of the island, by the way, most people in Puerto Rico believe in Catholic religion. Supposedly around 74%. Similar to the question you guys asked, it's a very generational thing as well. Better now, man. In Old San Juan, they split the island between two separate religious groups. They have a religious group close to San Cristobal, so one fortification, and another religious group, which is the Dominican, goes closer to El Morro. Evidently, we're right now very close to San Cristobal, so this is the Franciscans. Okay, the Franciscans were closer to the area. They were also brought here at the same time that they started planning to build El San Cristobal, so it's tied into that. Okay, the Franciscans arrived here in 1625. Okay, let's see. In terms of their influence here, this is also a great evidence to talk again about the 1800s. And you're going to notice a pattern about talking a lot about the 1800s, and it has a lot to do with that, well, before the 1800s, this was viewed primarily as a military establishment, Milan. That was the biggest use for it. Before that, we could talk about a ton of attacks, Milan, a ton of other things. But most of the entire buildings that we're seeing here were all built in the 1800s. And the idea of that really comes into play also with the architecture. The neoclassical outlook of the time, Milan, spans all the way through all the Spanish colonies and also the ones in Old San Juan. Okay? Pero nada, mira, in terms of the area, one of the places that was attacked was here, La Casa San Francisco. And in terms of the attacks that the U.S. did here, in total there were 2 in Old San Juan. There was one which was done on the northern part, but they didn't disembark on the area. And they just threw a couple of bombardments, and La Iglesia San Jose got compromised, and also this one. And you notice what got compromised, because the gray outline that covers the entirety of the plaza is what used to be the entirety of the church. So the Franciscan church used to be a lot bigger, it's just that it got broken down. No, it go all the way up down, all the way down there. And at one point, the college church, there's always a tradition to bury people inside of the church. That's like, if you're buried inside of the churches, you're like of the royalty. You'll see this in all the Catholic churches. And here's the same thing. So right now, there are catacombs right behind us. And you can notice that there's names around the areas. There's even people who have buried after 1898 on the area. You'll notice they're marked on certain areas. I don't know this one, but there's certain marks around the area. Okay. And you see people that are buried on the area. And inside you have an entire catacomb that's still preserved. And by the way, there's levels. So the church also divides between where you're buried. It's like of a social class. For example, if you're buried inside there, it's like you're high classy. If you're here, you're another class, and the thing goes through this area. You'll notice this also in La Iglesia. When we mentioned Juan Ponce de Leon being buried, he's currently buried in the Antique Cathedral. The people of the high class are always buried closer to the back or closer to the end of the church. Okay? Entonces, pero nada, mira. In terms of the Franciscans, well, we have this information. Apart from that, there's also on the back here what used to be their convent. And I find this also funny. The convent is currently a university for psychology, so it's no longer the convent. The convent is the university for psychology. But now we're going to talk about something which is also in a way tied into dividing social classes in the Spanish colonial setting. We're going to look behind here. You're going to notice the colors of the buildings. First, I'm going to talk about how they were introduced, and you're going to notice that they're not tied into Catholicism in Spanish. The colors here were placed in 1950. The Spanish were long gone by that time. But the Spanish colonial setting doesn't have the colors. They're all before the Spanish, but in the case of Old San Juan is an exception to all this. The colors weren't implemented all the way to 1950. And by the way, the reason that they implemented in 1950 is because Puerto Rico and the U.S. as well have a rule to make an economic shift to Puerto Rico around tourism. So they start promoting the Spanish colonial setting as this thing that you face. And not only that, they still promote it like that. And if you notice it, apart from the 1950, they bring in the colors, they also bring in the entire ship line. By the way, most of Old San Juan, the economy of Old San Juan, a lot of it circulates around the beach. You get a photo of like 19. That starts in 1950. So they bring colors, and they also bring that. And apart from that, has anybody been to Condado? I bet somebody has been to Condado. No? You guys, where you notice that there's a lot of hotels there. All of them were brought also in the 1950s. And it's because they were really promoting that tourism. Yeah. About tourism in the 1950s, I believe tourism has always been certain sectors, and currently still happens the same thing, that in a way making the main source of economy tourism, but it makes the prices more up for the visitor rather than for the locals. And that happened in 1950, and it keeps happening currently now. So I would tell you that there's probably a lot of sectors that were against it as well. And I'm currently is tourism. Currently is tourism. Percentage of like the man, I don't know the percentage right now. The second biggest is tied in towards manufacturing companies. But to be quite honest, the percentage, the difference, I don't remember the exact percentage, but I know that the difference between the second and the golden age, but really this was a place of complete poverty. Yeah. There wasn't food to get out. Very few. Exactly. Very few of the rich getting all the money. So this was a colonial agriculture. If you notice the bricks were replaced for this at one point when I was younger, and the same street we were on the other side. And it used to have the blue bricks. The blue bricks, by the way, are from 1891. And most of the buildings are from the 1800s, except the area on the south. ¿Me entiendes? When you get to the south of the island, you notice that you're looking at buildings which have the more Art Deco approach to the 1900s. And they're still recreations of the neoclassical look, but the two streets on the south, Recinto Sur and this one that we're on right now, are all going to be mostly built on the 1900s. And the reason for that is because of the wall. We're talking about the wall. The US started building outside or nearby where they broke down the wall. And we're going to see that they broke down the wall over there. So where they started building was the areas that the Spanish had to take the space from on the south, okay? Entonces, ahí perdón. Yeah, man. But nada, we're gonna keep going through here. We're gonna talk about this building here. Do we have anybody from New York? Okay, well, cool. We have some people. This building has a tie-in towards New York. In 1944, when we had the first elected governor of Puerto Rico. Before 1940, by the Puerto Rican people, by the way, the first elected governor by Puerto Rican people, 1944. Before that, in 1938, we had a governor which was picked by the U.S., which was called Redford. He was from New York. And the thing with him is that he started doing a plan called the Mini Manhattan Project. And that influences a lot these last two streets. By the way, it's not tied into the bomb at any point, ¿verdad? It's also in the same time relatively, but nothing tied into that. It's tied into where's the city of Manhattan, the similarities between Manhattan and Old San Juan. Two islands separated from the mainland, connected by multiple bridges, right? The thing is, he wants to do something of like a Wall Street in the area, and he starts bringing foreign banks towards the areas. This is not the first, this is the first bank in Puerto Rico built in 1893, but it was just one floor. Then when Redford comes in 1938, they up it to 12 other floors because he wanted to bring the Art Deco influence and that this would look like a banking district, basically. But he builds this one, he built the Oriental Bank, and he also built two other banks on the other end, all with the Art Deco of New York, ¿verdad? And if you notice on the south, there's also starting builds of the parkings, and all of them also have the Art Deco of the 1900s. So the youngest part of Old San Juan is on the south. Okay, and in terms of the height of the buildings, you're going to notice that they're taller because, well, the buildings that the Spanish had, they couldn't build over the wall. When they break the wall, they start building up. Okay, and also apart from that, another point is the cathedral. The cathedral had to always be the highest point. So now, for your information, if you guys notice that on the south there's a lot of taller buildings, now you know why. Okay, we're gonna go down here now. We're gonna. So here we have La Rogativa. I'm gonna incentivize you guys to try and come back here at 5:36. The reason for it, this piece is supposed to be seen around that hour. Why is this? It's when the sun is setting. It's supposed to illuminate the three torches on top. There's one time of the year that it sets right there. But on other parts, it sets completely the opposite way. Not the opposite way, because that would be over there. That would be, not
bigger problems.
Exacto, we would have bigger problems. Exacto. Pero it's supposed to, at one point of the year, set up there and make an illusion of the three torches being lit up. In terms of this is the legend that I mentioned that has a tie-in towards the Catholic Church. It's tied in toward this piece here, and we're going to talk about it. But the difference between this legend and the other one is that, there's some legends that have some truth in them. This one has some truth in it. And what's truthful is that there was an attack, and this legend talks about this attack, right? There was a general called Abercrombie, which in 1797 went into Puerto Rico, but instead of infiltrating Puerto Rico, he decided to, in 1797, do a naval blockage around the area. And the thing is, doing a naval blockage in an area like Old San Juan, that is the entire defense for everything that gets the entire city, country, it was a very nice strategy, I guess, by Abercrombie, ¿verdad? The thing is, he holds out Old San Juan for a period of, like 3 months. And the thing is, that in this period, the Spanish soldiers started losing out on a lot of supplies. And the thing is, the woman and the bishop, as the story says and as the legend goes, they go outside with their torches and their candles, and they light them up, and they do what's called a procession. The thing is, a procession is a pledge of faith. And now the thing is that out of all the people that were there, supposedly there was around like 2,000 people with their torches and their candles, and from afar, Abercrombie saw it, and he says, "Oh damn, the Spanish are preparing for an attack." And as a result, he retires the entire naval blockage. So the pledge of faith that was done by the procession now works. Similar thing to what happened over there, right? But the thing is that I mentioned, this has a little bit of truth in it, and it's not tied in towards the church, but it's tied in towards the attack. Abercrombie did attack in 1797, but we have two versions. We have the legend and the one that I'm going to tell you now. The one that I'm going to tell you now is basically in 1797, he eventually, after doing the naval blockage, he decides to attack. Pero in a very different manner, he attacks through Loíza. Instead of going through the actual city of Old San Juan, he decides to disembark in a place called Loíza. Loíza is a place completely dominated by the African Caribbean people of Puerto Rico, and still to this day, it's one of the richness of culture of that side of our culture in there. There's where bomba, a lot of the innovations of the mixture of bomba with salsa as well. So a lot of other things, right? But the thing is, when we're talking about Loíza, ¿verdad? Loíza is an area that gets an attack between the areas, and the English weren't expecting really a fight in the area, and they gave them a fight for a long period of time, for an entire week, to the point when they finally were able to reach outside of Loíza. Well, what happens is that they are already beaten down, so they retire the entire attack. Okay, and that's what actually happened. A lot of people consider this the first act of patriotism in Puerto Rico, and that brings me again to talk about when Puerto Ricans really become Puerto Ricans. It's entering the 1800s, and it's because in a way the cultures have been so mixed, and people were getting an identity, a national identity to being in the island, ¿verdad? And when we're talking about that, they weren't seeing it as a separate thing, as like the Africans and the Taínos and the thing, but they were seeing themselves as one defending against an external invader, ¿verdad? And so a lot of people consider this the first act of patriotism in Puerto Rico, and other things like, for example, El Grito de Lares in 1868 and things like that give you the idea of that identification of being Puerto Rican, ¿verdad? Y pues nada, I hope that you guys understand that thing, ¿verdad? Apart from that, here there's this passageway here. If anybody has the opportunity to go here, go down here and follow that entire passageway, you can notice that there's people also walking over there. You can walk all around the bay, and if you see the sunset here, you can also see it down through here, and it's beautiful. I wouldn't recommend to do it now, although today we have a pretty good temperature, but sometimes it gets really hot.
Yes.
Yeah, and being close to the wall, if you notice, touch this.
Yeah.
This resonates heat in a way that is not that great, ¿verdad? So being right next to it is a little bit bad, ¿verdad? Now, to enter here, you go right there through that entrance there. And also you can go down through the cathedral all the way up to that red gate there. And by the way, that red gate is the main gate of San Juan. We've seen the 3 of them, but truly 2 of them are broken down, so we really didn't see them. This is the only one remaining. It's actually the oldest one. Okay? Apart from that, you notice that other side of the fortification there? La Fortaleza, we talked about being a palace, but also being a fortification. Well, you have that in the back, okay? You'll see. And that is a very big ship. Okay? But no, we're gonna keep going. Vamos a keep going. Aquí tenemos el morro. El Morro is built in 1538. It's the one in the middle. Out of the 3 fortifications, the one in the middle. This doesn't mean that it has less importance or the second biggest importance. It's the most important out of 3. And the reason for that is because of the reason that we talked about right in the start. We talked about them moving to Old San Juan to protect the entrance of the bay. And what does El Morro do? It controls that entrance. The ship that we saw that was huge, passing by, it enters through there. Everything that enters through Old San Juan enters through that entrance there. Right, that's the entrance of the bay. The thing is, El Morro, people believe it to just be this size, but El Morro actually extends itself over there. You see that other fortification over there? Mm-hmm. Well, that is an extension of El Morro. It acts as the cross-firing for the thing. So in terms of that entrance, they have it protected through the 2 sides. Apart from that, in terms of the actual fortification here, it also has a huge elevation from the sea level, so it has that disadvantage for the ships that are attacking on the Atlantic Ocean. But the biggest thing that El Morro has in difference towards El San Cristobal and all these other fortifications is that El Morro has the huge green field. And the green field is, a lot of people ask if it was always there, if it was put in later. The green field currently is the home for people having like flying kites and also doing beautiful picnics. But before it was a complete battlefield. The Spanish left it like this so that if they get infiltrated towards the south and they're getting, in terms of getting attacked through the ground, their enemies would have no cover. And that was something that functioned in a lot of manners. There was the attack of Cumberland that we talked about, that they all died of defecation. You guys remember that?
Dehydration.
And dehydration as well, exactly. Most of them didn't die for defecation, they died from dehydration. But the thing is with this entire thing is that they didn't overtake Old San Juan technically completely. They overtook everything else and they pushed the Spanish towards El Morro. And they were playing the waiting game. They were waiting for them to surrender. And what happens is what we know. Okay? But apart from that, there's also that monument that you see there in the middle. I'm pointing towards. That also talks about and talked done by the Dutch. Apart from the English that were here for 90 days, the Dutch were here for 23 days. And the same thing happened. They pushed the Spanish all the way up to El Morro, and then they didn't know what to do getting to El Morro. And what happens is, El Morro, by the 1600s, they had built an underground tunnel which connected towards the city. And what happens is that they started deploying troops underground, and in just one night, in those 23 days, the last night there, they went from behind and started flanking them through all the areas. Around El Morro, they also had around 4 lines of defenses on the other side before they had built everything in the 1800s. They had lines of defenses all around the area. They deployed the troops towards those underground tunnels and then threw them out in just one night. In terms of most of the places here in Old San Juan, they're all going to have really a connection towards El Morro. Most places here, you're going to notice that when you're going into restaurants, you're going to notice that they're going to have like a like a basement. In Puerto Rico, by the way, we do not have basements. It's very uncommon to have one. But in Old San Juan, you do, because before it used to be the underground tunnels, which apart from deploying troops underground, they did the first aqueduct system through there as well. There's also a place here called Bayaha that literally can carry around 500,000 gallons. We're talking about insane amounts. When we had the Hurricane Maria, people here were very nice because they have natural cisterns that were operating through the tunnels as well. So now that's a piece of information that I'm giving you guys. But no, it's a lot of amount of water in Bayaha. If you guys go see Bayaha, Bayaha is the last thing the Spanish ever built here, and it also has that there. Pero mira, apart from that, in Morro, we talked about the green field, we talked about the Dutch attack, but in Morro was also the area that the U.S. attacked from 2 times, okay? So we're going to talk about the Hispanic-American War as well, and that's how we're going to finish the entire thing, okay? In terms of the Hispanic-American War, to understand it truly, you have to go through all the context of the 3 different people involved, ¿verdad? You have the U.S. are under McKinley, and McKinley is, in a way, has this role of, after the Civil War, ¿verdad? 20 years after that, they start expanding on their you know, it's this expansion of the United States. We're talking about not only the western side, that's very known, also the eastern side towards the Caribbean islands like Cuba, Puerto Rico, and in this case Guam and the Philippines as well, being looked upon as these territories that are these colonies that they're going to incorporate. You know, the thing is, in terms of Puerto Rico, they were primarily looking at Puerto Rico for controlling the trade routes. When we talk about Puerto Rico is close to El Canal de Panama, also has El Canal of Mona, which is probably one of the most important ones in the Caribbean, and also has the distinction between the Atlantic Ocean and South America and the Caribbean Sea, right? But in a way, they were looking for Puerto Rico in this, and when they actually established in Puerto Rico, they start moving towards creating military bases around the poles, the opposite poles. Pero nada, mira. When we're talking about, that's the U.S. In terms of the Spanish, we're dealing with the Spanish with the 1800s being really the demise of their empire. We're talking about the 1800s being basically the end of the entire thing. And in terms of Puerto Rico and Cuba, they were looking for their independence. By the way, if we want, we can move there to the shadow. Let's see all the people over there. I'm going to take you guys into account as well. Okay, we're going to move down through here. Sorry for moving us. But,
These guys have
yeah, and then I saw you guys and I was like, this is the smart move.
got good ears.
No, mira, pero nada, mira. We talked about the Puerto Rican flag in 1895, ¿verdad? And this matters a lot because we're looking at a Puerto Rico and a Cuba that are looking for their independence. ¿Verdad? And this matters a lot because then in 1898 we enter into the Hispanic-American War with the same thing. ¿Verdad? When the U.S. sent the ship of the main ship, USS Maine, they sent it to Cuba with artillery and militarization towards helping the Cubans reach their independence. ¿Verdad? The thing is, this ship explodes, and out of that, ¿verdad, there comes a lot of conspiracy theories, but it's been revealed that it was a misfunction on the ship. A malfunction on the ship led to the explosion. And now they declare the war on the Spanish. In terms of Puerto Rico, they attacked around 4 times really. The first one was a bombardment on the area here. They sent a couple of different cannons towards the area, and there you have the recreations of what we talked about in San Cristobal, and also the San Francisco and the Iglesia San Jose. I told you guys you can look up the recreations that they've done. And apart from that, then due to that, they weren't able to disembark in Old San Juan because it was a very difficult place to do so. They start sending these ships towards the south of the island, the south of the country, completely on the south of the island, in the areas of Guanica and Salina, and that's when they first disembarked. Very oddly enough, the first place that Columbus hit and supposedly discovered Puerto Rico was also the place that the U.S. arrived from, ¿verdad? And when they arrived towards the area, they actually unified. Something that a lot of people see is that the separatist movements of Puerto Rico in the 1930s were very much at war with the U.S., pero by the time in 1890, they were actually unified, ¿verdad? And it was because in a way the US were promoting the independence of these different countries, and they started militarizing the separatist movements of Puerto Rico. What happens is that then they start moving towards, from the south of the island, all the way up to the northern part of the island towards Old San Juan through ground, ¿verdad? And when they finally enter to Old San Juan, they have not only the independence movements of Puerto Rico fighting against the Spanish, but they also have themselves, ¿verdad? And also a military that by that time was a lot more advanced than the ones from the Spanish. For example, the Spanish were very hesitant into giving militarization to a country that was looking for their independence, ¿verdad? In the case of the cannons of El Morro, they could only reach 3 miles, and the ones from the US could reach 7. So apart from having the difference in also militarization, also having the backing of the separatist movements here in Puerto Rico, it really puts the Spanish into a wall, and they end up saying, we're going to sell Puerto Rico, Guam, and Philippines for $20 million, ¿verdad? And that's how Puerto Rico transfers into being part of the United States. And the thing is, with Cuba, I did mention Cuba there, And it's because they got a pseudo-independence thing. They're very different that I'm not going to get into, ¿verdad? Pero nada, from 1898 onwards, we're a U.S. colony, ¿verdad? And then from 1903, from 1898 towards 1903, it was a military form of government, ¿verdad? So they were establishing military bases around the area. The first infrastructure done in Puerto Rico by the U.S. is actually an infrastructure to carry military equipment around the area. If you look at Highway Number 2, it was made initially for that, okay? Then in 1903, they established a civil government, completely different to the one that we have now, in the sense that all the representatives were from the United States, and it still wasn't the Republican form of government that you see currently, or that you see in the United States, ¿verdad? Then if you jump to 1917, that is probably one of the most important dates in modern Puerto Rican history. 1917 is what establishes Puerto Rico's citizenship through a law, which is very different to the citizenship that you have in the U.S. because, ¿verdad? It's tied in towards something that's a constitutional right if you're born there. ¿Verdad? It's completely different towards it being incorporated through law. If you look at the differences between naturality, I know that it's been something that's been debated even now in the U.S. between, is this person a citizen or that type of thing. But they established it in 1917 due to a process which is called Jones Act, ¿verdad? Apart from Jones Act giving the citizenship, it also gives the first representative that we have in Congress, which is, well, a representative that most Puerto Ricans are going to tell you to spread the notion of having more representation in Congress. In Congress currently there's one representative since 1917. This representative has a voice but doesn't have a vote on anything that happens in Puerto Rico. And considering that all the federal laws that are passed through Congress very much affect the situation in Puerto Rico, very unfortunate that they still can't vote on anything that's passed at least to Puerto Rico. Pero nada, that was placed as well in 1917. And in terms of Jones Act makes completely the concept of the import and export laws that are in Puerto Rico that I mentioned briefly, and I'm going to still mention briefly because if not, we're going to be here an entire hour if I had to deconstruct Jones Act completely, right? But take in mind that it makes also a lot of the economic sanctions that Puerto Rico has and a lot of the laws that it has between being through the U.S. government and the Puerto Rican government, ¿verdad? But the thing is, the government that we know now was in place in 1917. We still had the civil government in 1903 by that time. Then in 1952 is when they do the one that we have now. 1952 is when they do the Commonwealth. And the Commonwealth is something that wasn't done primarily by the US, but it was really something that was done completely by the United Nations. The United Nations had a role into, after World War II, decolonizing a lot of the different places in America. And the reason they did it was because they saw that colonization produced wars and conflicts. So to avoid international conflicts and wars, they decided to do the concept of a Commonwealth, ¿verdad? Towards Puerto Rico. But the thing is, Commonwealths are very different towards, ¿verdad? If we put Commonwealths into a complete broad thing, Massachusetts is a Commonwealth, the same thing goes for Canada, but it's completely different, right? In Puerto Rico's case, I would say that it's its own country, but it's owned by the U.S. federal government. And in that case, it has to obey all the federal laws that are passed through Congress, ¿verdad? Y pues nada, that brings me back to 1917 and the message that I'm going to spread to you guys to that of having more representation, okay? So sí, pero that's the entire tour. I hope you guys learned a lot of other things, ¿verdad? And with that being said, mucho amor, paz y empatía from my part and from all the Puerto Ricans that you'll meet, okay? Mucho amor. Gracias.
Thank you, Juan.
Thank you for watching this video. If you haven't done so yet, don't forget to click like, subscribe, and click that bell icon to be notified when we release new content. Also, find us on Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram. And don't forget, we book travel. Give us a call at 188-299-1969 and we'll get you on your joyful wandering. And if you've made it this far, go check out these videos. Again, thanks for watching. Bye, Wanderer.